I just realized on Monday that the Reading Rush channel has posted a video with a new tag called the Racing to Read book tag, with some questions basically, and I thought I could answer them in this video. I know I made a video last week talking about book recommendations and such, so I'll try to not repeat any of the books that I already mentioned last week and just mention some different ones that I've been reading this year. So if you're wondering why I keep changing backgrounds in this video, it's because I initially decided to film this tag together with my Reading Rush video, but while I was editing it turned out to be a very long video, so I thought it would be better to kind of cut them in two separate pieces. So I keep moving around and changing my backgrounds, but the answers are the same. So the first question is, warm up, a book that stretches your mind. What this question means is a bit open to interpretation, so I've kind of interpreted it as a book that makes you think in general. And I'm going to mention Stone of Patience by Atiq Rahimi, and this book is set in Afghanistan. It's about a woman who looks after her husband who was wounded at war. Basically, as he's about to die, she starts talking and kind of spilling her secrets about what it was like being his wife. So the book starts off as you would probably expect with the synopsis. The man was pretty abusive towards her, and it wasn't easy for her, having him as a husband. She's kind of living her daily life right in the middle of a war zone, and that kind of means that sometimes the sentences or the things the characters are saying or doing is suddenly cut short as they have to leave quickly or hide somewhere, and it leaves things up to interpretation a lot. So that's a book that definitely makes you think, not only during but especially at the end. Like, once you have all the information that you need, you kind of have to come up with your own conclusion. Question number 2, what's a book that you started but never finished? I have a lot of books that I started and never finished, especially because I get most of my books from the library. I often don't finish reading it in time and then I just give it back to the library. I'm gonna say 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. But in this case, I do intend to go back to the library and pick it up again, because when I was a kid, I really loved the future. I wanted to grow up and be a robot. I always kept dreaming about how the future planet world is going to be. But as I started to get older, I kind of lost my dreams or my hope for a positive looking future, we could say. I wasn't really looking forward to getting old anymore when I started seeing the negative things the world has. But I do think that this book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, kind of reawakened my love for the future, and I'm back to being excited about all the possibilities of the things that might happen. So I definitely want to finish reading it and see where the author goes with the topics he proposes. And question number 3, a book you read really quickly. I'm gonna say The Mount of Mt.Koya by Izumi Kyoka. I read it quickly because it had no chapter separations. There was no clear point where I could stop reading. I just read the whole book in one sitting. Question number 4. Marathon, what's your favorite long book? Honestly, I mostly read short books. I'm lazy. but I think that a book has to be really, really good to kind of keep my attention for more than 500 pages. So I don't often read long books. I have a few on my list that I've been meaning to read, but I haven't gotten around to them yet. But my favorite long book is probably Secondhand Time, The Last of the Soviets by Svetlana Alexievich. I think that's how you pronounce it. I read it at the end of last year, and the author basically interviews people in Russia who lived kind of the fall of communism, the start of capitalism, and basically how they felt about that, the experiences, the thoughts and opinions. It's a bit of a emotionally hard book to read, especially because it's non-fiction, so everything that it talks about and the people's stories are real things that happened to them. But it's one of those books where you read it and it kind of changes your perspective on the world and teaches you a lot that later on gives you a wider understanding of many other things that you probably wouldn't have realized or seen from that point of view earlier, like before reading the book. So the Spanish version of this book is 800 pages because there's a really long introduction, but I think maybe the English version has fewer pages. So question number 5 is hurdles. What's a book that had ups and downs? Usually if I don't like a book at the start, I abandon it pretty early on. I don't stick with books that I'm not enjoying. Earlier this year I read A Small Place by Jamaica, Kincaid, and this book has 3 parts, like part 1, part 2, part 3, and the first part 1, is written in second person. I generally really like books that are written in second person because I think that the author really puts themselves out there to write something different than what is usual and normal. So part 1 is about tourism. It criticizes tourists going to other countries, particularly Barbados in this case, which the writer's from Barbados. Because it's written in second person, it's difficult not to get a little bit defensive, but I don't mind feeling uncomfortable when I'm reading, so I really loved that first chapter. But after that, like parts 2 and 3 talk about corruption and slavery, and it kind of feels more like a list of things that happened rather than following the same writing method that was used in the first part, so it kind of feels like a different book. I probably would have given it 4 stars, maybe even 5 stars, if it had continued like part 1 all the way through, but it kind of went downhill, and it had some interesting parts later on, but I think that part 1 was much better than parts 2 and 3. And finally, the last question of today, finish line, a book you were proud to finish. I'm gonna say The Girl Who Saved the King of Sweden by Jonasson, and I'm simply saying this one because I hadn't read many books since finishing high school, and I picked this one up early last year, and it kind of started my new reading habit again. It took me a long time to finish that specific book, like almost a month for something really small, but I was really happy to kind of get back into the habit of reading, so I'm really glad that I did finish and read this book. So the next question is, best book you'll read during a readathon? The only readathon I've ever done was when I tried to read 7 novellas in 7 days, and because I mentioned The Blue Fox the other day in the last video, I'm gonna say The Ball by Irène Némirovsky. The book is about a young girl and her relationship with her mother as she grows up, and at the end of the story there's a ball and we get to see the real personality of every character. There's definitely a plot twist here that I wasn't expecting, so it was a very fun read, quick read. Finally, the last question, an underrated book you wish got more attention. I have this one here, The Gift of Stones by Crace. This is my dad's favourite book. I asked him which book I should read and he recommended this one. And it's about a boy in a Stone Age village who is a little bit useless when it comes to making things with stone, which is kind of the task of the village. And so he decides to go on his own adventures and kind of make his own path. So we kind of follow him around and listen to the stories he tells other characters. So even though Jim Crace is a fairly well-known author, I haven't heard anyone speak of this book specifically, and I think it's definitely worth a read. So those were my 8 books for this tag. My reading rush video will be probably coming out next week. Anyway, so let me know down below if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned and what you thought of them. And if you think that you've read something similar that I might like, also comment that, because I always like to expand my reading list, my ever-growing reading list. And that's it for today. I'll see you next week.